Hey, I'm Tyler Jones, and you're listening to the Element Podcast. What's going on, my Woods people? We are sitting here in Sulphur Springs, Texas again, and we are on the comfy, cozy, brand new couch from Nebraska Furniture Mart. And you can hear KC chuckling in the background. What's going on, dude?
Man, not a lot. I'm trying to situate. This couch is so comfy, it kind of swallows you a little bit. But
I know, I sleep on it every
night. Oh, kind of rubbing my belly. We just had a good lunch.
And I ate too much gumbo. I was falling back in my chair, just sitting there like, I'm going to be worthless the rest of the day.
Yeah, I ate a bunch of elk stir fry today too. Shared that with you a little bit. It was super spicy and super tasty.
It was. Yep, yeah. It was. I liked it a lot. It was. You had me worried because you like spicy foods and you're a little bit crazy. So like you put those together, and when you say this stuff is pretty hot, I'm thinking blow your head off style, you know. And it wasn't that bad. It was. No. It was actually like perfect. What I consider perfect. You had the perfect dish, dude.
It's what you call the good burn.
Yeah, it was.
It was a good burn. Had your lips going a little bit. Yeah, Serrano Peppers, man. Gosh, I love Serranos. Like I mean, I'm a true Texan. Jalapenos are where my heart lies, but Serrano Peppers just add, like, it's just a sharper heat, if that makes sense. And they mix really good with other veggies cooked, I think, personally. And Serranos are funny because, like, you cut them and eat them raw, like in pico or something like that. And pico de gallo, in case you don't know what pico is. We're not talking about rooster combs. But, like, you eat them in pico de gallo, and they're really not that spicy. They're just got a decent little flavor. But, man, you put a little cooking on them, my goodness. It makes a big difference for sure. Yeah. It was too hot for my wife last night, so I felt kind of bad. I always try to not cook things that she will eat, of course, you know, as opposed to making them too spicy. And it's too spicy last night, so I got to make up for that tonight and cook something that's more bland. We're going to have kebabs tonight, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah.
Kebabs.
Yeah, good old kebabs, man. Kebabs are good. I like them.
Yeah, they are.
Mm-hmm. So you had gumbo for lunch. What was in the gumbo?
I had widgeons and whitetails in there.
Widgeons and whitetails, dude.
Yeah. We had, I got a buddy that he's I guess a co-chairman here in Sulphur Springs for the Ducks Unlimited chapter, and I'm involved in the I guess you could call me the chairman of the Emory chapter, which is much less of a big deal. And anyway, we become good friends in the last year or so. And anyway, he took me. First of all, he brought me a couple weekends ago a bunch of widgeons one morning. He texted me. He said, "Hey, you want some ducks?" Because I had texted him. Said that I wanted some ducks if he had any extras, and he was like, "You want some ducks? I got some this morning." And I was like, "Sure." He said, "I'll be there in 2 minutes." Well, it was like 7:30, and I was like, "I'm in my boxers at 7:30 on a Saturday." So I went in my room and threw some shorts on real quick, and he was at my door before I could get back in here. But anyway, gave me a limit of widgeons, and I cleaned them up and took them to my dad, and who has learned a gumbo recipe from a Cajun woman that rocks. I mean, it's the best food I've ever had, pretty much. There's two things that I like pretty much head and shoulders above anything else, and then other than that, I can't really tell you what those two, like which one actually beats the other one. But there's a shrimp and grits that is sold at the Bin 303 in Rockwall. Oh my goodness, it rocks my world. And then the gumbo is right there with it.
So you got to have your two most favorite foods in conjunction with one another.
Yeah,
man.
Yeah,
special guy.
Because I had a birthday this past week.
How'd you turn? 32.
22.
The running joke with Tyler is I make him a year older about every day we talk. So that gumbo's good, man. I for sure would vouch for that being one of the top three that I've eaten. You know, it's a lot more less soupy, I guess you would say, than most gumbos I've eaten. It almost reminds me of like a chicken and dumplings texture more, you know, not tastes nothing like that, you know, but it's what it's like eating. That's good. Stuff.
He said he did something, he had used something different. One of the fats that he used was different than what he usually uses or something. Yeah. So he said he didn't think it tasted quite as good as the rest that he's made.
Oh,
but
man.
It's really good. So anyway, had that happen, and then kind of, I guess, weaseled my way into a duck hunt later the next weekend, which was this past weekend. And that was my first duck hunt of the year, I'm sad to say.
My goodness.
Last weekend of the year. So
yeah. How'd y'all do?
We did good, man. We were on a pretty big little tank, and, birds come in early on a tank and land out in the middle. And the wind was kind of weird, apparently, for what they normally deal with there. Kind of had a west wind. And so we had 4 people, and we set up kind of what we thought was the wrong spot at first. And this huge group started coming in for about 5 minutes. Just, several large groups of birds were coming in. And so 2 of us split over. 2 of us stayed where we were at, and the other 2 went to the other side of the pond, and we kind of got into them pretty good. We could have killed more if we'd have been set up in a different spot, I think, but I think we had like 15 birds between the 4 of us. It was fun. It was definitely a good duck hunt. It wasn't slow, and we didn't stay around till 10 a.m. I'm not a big guy. I'm not a big fan of, like, once the action slows down, I'm not a big fan of just staying out there because you're trying to get your limit. You know what I'm saying? Like, if it's not happening anymore, like, I'm not going to stay there for 2 more groups to come in late or whatever. Usually, so.
Were y'all picky, or did y'all like just shoot tasty ducks, or did y'all shoot most everything that came in?
I mean, it was mostly gadwalls. We got into we had a couple groups of widgeons come in, and we just couldn't get them really within range. And we shot 1 green-winged teal. So it was mostly, gadwalls and a teal, and then we had 1 ringneck come in. And I didn't even pull my gun up. I am picky about the ducks. I mean, I want to shoot what I'm going to eat, and I'm not going to clean a ringneck because it's almost impossible to break through the skin, even with a knife. So, anyway, ended up that night, I got home and I cleaned those birds up, or I cleaned up a limit's worth, and marinated them for several hours. And made poppers out of them.
Oh, man.
I know you make fun of it.
Poppers.
I know you make fun of it.
Hey, at the end of the day, there's nothing easier to make, really, than poppers, So, like, if you want to enjoy a good wild game dinner and you want it to be delicious and true to Texas, you'd make duck poppers, Like, I mean, they're good,
They were incredible. Like, I really am trying to cook more often with this wild game and expand what I do. And I put a marinade on them, and I had sliced each breast into a half, basically, which was just right, man. I mean, and so when I got back from Walmart later that day, I sliced jalapenos into like 4 or 6, quartered them up, or maybe not quite that big, and then took cream cheese, put it inside the jalapeno slice, put the cream cheese in between the jalapeno and the duck, wrapped it with bacon, and then put them on the grill, and basically just cooked them on one side as hot as I, put the grill as hot as it could get, which my grill probably won't even get to 400, and grilled them until basically they kind of came unstuck. Flipped them over a couple more minutes, and just did the finger test for.
Does the rarity test work on ducks too?
It did for me, man.
That's
I mean,
cool.
I felt them, and I was like, yeah, it's pretty good,
Did you go medium, or would you go with them?
Medium rare.
Medium rare?
And, they were definitely, some parts of them could have been called medium easy, but like in the middle there, most of them were medium rare. Oh my goodness, dude. It was some of the best duck I've ever had, and didn't have to use barbecue sauce or nothing. I mean,
I think people get really caught up on the whole, it's poultry, so it's deadly unless you char it. You know what I mean? And I mean, we've probably talked about this before, but when you shoot something that morning, come home, clean it, and marinate it, it has no time for anything nasty to get on it. You know what I mean? As long as you're good with your contamination at home, you could cut those breasts out of those ducks and eat them raw and be fine. Unless there's like rice breast or something real nasty in there,
right?
And which I don't think that'll kill you either.
I mean, they wasn't like the elk meat raw, but it was definitely like when we put them into the little plate and set them on the counter to get everything ready. There was blood coming out, or whatever you want to call that. I guess it's blood. I mean, it's red blood juice, and like, I was like, hopefully they're not too underdone. And I cut into them, and they were just perfect, dude.
Yeah, that's good.
It's good. Really, really, really good. I was kind of sad that like I didn't get to go duck hunting more often and do that. You know?
What else did you do Saturday?
Well, I had to go trooping without you for a little bit.
Oh my gosh!
I know, dude. But I went and checked out some new stuff on new public land stuff, and found some interesting things, man. We talked a little bit about it, but
good interesting or bad interesting? We've referred to bad interesting on public.
We have, so
yeah.
maybe I should use a different word for that. I found some awesome things.
Some awesome things, cool.
So found some areas that I think are not too far from the road, that still are kind of like not in the they're not in the crosshairs when you look at that property on a map.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, that's where I want to go, And I just happened to kind of end up there. I was with Jet, and
your son.
And I basically had to carry him on my shoulders. So we didn't go super far, but we were over a half mile. As I measured it out, it seemed to be over, a couple hundred yards over a half mile or so. So it was back in there. But yeah, I mean, looking at this area, there's this particular public property. There's not just a ton of agriculture around it, but there, happened to be close to an ag field. Well, we didn't really know. You had kind of sent me in there to look, and actually, one of the fields was just coastal Bermuda, which is prominent around here.
Worthless.
And it's
when it comes to wildlife.
For deer. I mean, you'll see them out in it sometimes, but they're usually, as far as I understand, they're eating something else that's in it.
It's in it for sure.
And it's not a crop, for deer at all. So, anyway, there was another field in that area that was agged up, and ended up finding a good trail leading into it from the public, and found some mud on the fence.
Deer trail?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's mud on the fence on the top string, so the deer have been jumping over. And what he's saying here is that it's hard to tell sometimes with the hogs, what's really been using it. But yeah, there was several deer tracks, rubs, right in there on the inside of the tree line there. And I just felt really, really good about it, man. And it's kind of in one of those spots, it's just kind of out of the way, far enough that I don't think there's going to be a ton of action right in there. I didn't see, any action from people, any stands or anything. Just, kind of what we're keen in on is trying to find places that people are not normally hunting. And it may not be where the biggest deer in the woods is necessarily, but there's, that we've seen that there can definitely be some good solid deer there.
Oh yeah, for sure. And the biggest deer in the woods might go through there.
Right.
That's the thing. And like I can remember, through my years growing up and learning to hunt, looking for the big trees and thinking that's where the deer are. And that's not really true at all. And I think that a lot of people do that. And I still am guilty of it at sometimes, because when I walk up to a spot, I'm looking for the biggest tree to put my stand in. You know what I mean? Like, which might not always be the best location,
right.
And I think that that's something that, we're going to start really, I'm not going to say keying on, but observe and explore and, kind of experiment with in the 2017 season and see how that goes for us.
Definitely.
Not to say we aren't going to hunt some big woods too, but, it's something we've noticed for sure that, hey, when a deer lays down, he needs 3 feet of cover.
Right.
3 feet.
Yeah.
Vertically.
I mean, and even when they're laying down, sometimes they don't necessarily need cover if they are set up right, that they feel safe. You know,
for sure.
I mean, they can sit there in the wide open watching cars from a half mile away, and you could be looking right at them in the car and not see them because they blend in with everything, and they feel safe because they can see anything coming from a half mile and smell anything behind them. So it's not necessarily that they need any particular thing. So you have to really get creative with your thoughts and how and where you're going to go scouting sometimes to get away from people and look in the places that not everybody's going. And it turns up a lot of empty searches sometimes. But
it does. You got to be not afraid to wear out a couple pairs of boots to find a good spot, because we've had quite a few occasions already this year that treks and explorations turned out negative, which is still a positive. So, yeah, it's part of it.
So we got an interview coming up here.
Yeah.
With Whit Fosburgh of the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. That's coming up here in just a minute. Before we get to that, here in a couple of weeks, we're going to be going out of state, right?
Oh, man, we're going out of state, dude.
Yeah.
So you are most likely going to draw.
Well, there's a good chance.
Good chance.
There's a good chance.
There's a good chance you're going to draw the coveted Iowa tag. So right now, me and you were both talking earlier. We need a trip. Like, my wanderlust soul is just getting worn down. Even though I love where I live, I just want to go somewhere and get away for a little bit, you know. And I'm not the kind of guy who wants to go and sit on the beach and drink, fruity drinks all day. You know, like, that's not my thing. I do like the beach, but I want a fish pole in my hand when I'm there, you know.
Me too.
So, but, so we're going to get out, get a little bit of wild places, hopefully. And
we're going to do some public land scouting in Iowa.
Public land scouting, yeah. And so what happened on Saturday, me and Tyler were supposed to go and explore that place together, but my wife and I had to make a unexpected emergency room trip a little bit earlier in the week for her sickness. She's fine now, but Saturday I just didn't feel comfortable leaving her at home by herself. I just wanted to make sure I was there to take care of her and, fulfill my husbandly duties, giving her medicine and stuff. So I stayed at home and hot-spotted off my phone all day and looked at maps of Iowa and got a bunch of GPS coordinates of what I think will be good bedding areas, good funnels, maybe secondary funnels that you don't see. I noticed that on some maps you can select different layers, and not the topographical, but the hydrology maps are super helpful because it's almost like they took an electron microscope and just ran it across the whole surface, and you see exactly the way things work. And it's like shaded relief, so you can see where there's draws and valleys and stuff like that. Super cool. So that's what I did on Saturday. Wasn't near as cool as yours, but it was helpful.
It's going to help us out big time because I don't have internet at my house, which is embarrassing to say, I guess. But, I definitely don't get to spend as much time doing that stuff. So it's good that you have a good idea going into this. And I, following you around on public land this year, I definitely trust your eye and your mind to see what's going to hopefully, transpire into good whitetail habitat.
Yeah,
so.
For sure. I've hunted a lot of public land all through my life. Part of that just being because we aren't wealthy people and don't have the money for a lease, and part of it too because I enjoy the challenge. And it's cool how there's certain principles of public land that apply no matter if you're in Texas hunting whitetails here, in Iowa hunting big giants up there, or in Colorado on national forest land hunting elk there. And that's the place that's, really near and dear to my heart, and something we're going to talk to Whit about, because as of right now, our public lands are in great danger. And it's something here in Texas we don't feel as much because we don't have a ton of public land, and what we do have is mostly state land.
Right.
But
and the attack is coming on federal land.
Yeah, attack's coming on federal land because that's what the feds have access to.
They want to give it to the state.
Yeah, well, they want to sell it off.
Right. They want to give it to the state, which would...
Yeah, under the cover of selling off. We'll talk to Whit about that.
Yeah.
But just know that, if you've ever dreamed about going and chasing bugling elk in September, or you want to go way up to a high mountain stream and catch, native Snake River cuddies or something like that, those places are in grave danger right now, and part of it's us and who we voted into office to blame. So we kind of need to do something about it.
Yeah, and if you're listening and you have a bunch of oil money, you might be happy about that. Because you definitely, probably if you're connected well, you might have an opportunity to buy that place, that land, and have a pronghorn antelope to yourself or whatever. But if you're not, then definitely need to stand up and fight for what you believe in. And the funny thing is, even that person with a lot of oil money, they own that land already.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying. So it's not like. It's just they can't kick everybody off.
It's time for us to, exactly. It's time for us to fight for what we own. How weird is that to say?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Like, it doesn't feel right, but it is.
No, it's the truth.
You own the land.
We own this, and people in Congress are talking about taking it from us and giving it to the states, giving it back to the states. I've heard that from one of our near and dear senators here in Texas.
Which they never had. Yeah.
The states never had the land.
Yeah. It's true. So I guess the best thing to do now would be able to get somebody who has a lot more knowledge about this subject than we do. Have them talk about this. So you want to get Whit on the phone real quick?
Yeah, let's give Whit a call.
Let's do it. On the line right now, we have Whit Fosburgh. What's going on, Whit?
Not much, Tyler. How are you?
We're doing good, man. We're in sunny Texas today, and just kind of doing some remodeling on my house right now. So it's nice and quiet right now, though.
Well, it is not too quiet here in Washington, D.C. A little chaotic these days.
I can imagine, for sure. Well, I guess as an intro, man, why don't you go ahead and just, for the listener, let us know who you are and how you got where you are today.
Well, my name is Whit Fosburgh, and I'm the president and CEO of the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. And, I've been doing this stuff, all sort of federal conservation policy, really since I got out of college here in D.C., and I've worked for the U.S. Senate, Senator Tom Daschle, National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, ran their fisheries program, did a long stint with Trout Unlimited, and then about 6 years ago came over as the president and CEO here. Your listeners may not know a whole lot about us. We're a coalition of about 50 different outdoor groups, ranging from Ducks Unlimited and Mule Deer Foundation to Bonefish and Tarpon Trust and American Sport Fishing Association. But we also have some untraditional members like the Outdoor Industry Association, which is the trade association for REI and Eastern Mountain Sports and companies like that. Important partners of ours because they talk about jobs and conservation. We also have AFL-CIO as a partner because 70% of their 12 million members hunt and fish. Nature Conservancy and the Land Trust movement are a part of it because conserving land is important if you want to hunt and fish.
Absolutely. Well, that's great information there. You probably have answered several of our questions just in that little opening statement there. That's good to know. So you guys kind of, if you'll run me through again one more time. So you guys encompass several conservation organizations. Is that correct?
Yeah, we're not really a trade association. Nobody pays dues to be part of it. But if you think about the genesis of conservation in America, it was really the hunters and the anglers and sportsmen that created the modern conservation system, going all the way back to Theodore Roosevelt. And he did it because, he really credited getting outside and hunting and, spending his time in the wild with making him the man that he was. And that was in Maine and North Dakota and the Adirondacks, those places. And he really thought it should be part of what the American experience is to have everybody have that ability to get out and, prove themselves and experience, become, a man in, nature. And so he, during his presidency, set aside about 240 million acres for everybody to go out and hunt and fish and use in perpetuity. And then, look further on, we created a series of environmental laws, conservation laws. We stopped market hunting. We even created taxes ourselves during the Depression so that we could fund the modern conservation system. So today, every time you buy your guns, ammo, fishing tackle, motorboat fuel, you're paying an excise tax of 10 or 11% that pays for conservation in America. That money goes back to the states. And so when you see a guy out, in Texas, sort of your game warden, that guy is being paid for by sportsmen's dollars. 80% of the state agencies out there get, basically, their budgets come from sportsmen's dollars, be it excise taxes or license sales or tags. And then these groups popped up beginning in the 1930s with Ducks Unlimited, and then in the 1950s with Trout Unlimited, and then Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, the Rough Grouse Society, Pheasants Forever, Turkey Federation. I mean, these groups have done an amazing job of bringing back species that were once, almost at the edge. You think about, back in the turn of the century when Roosevelt was around, it was rare for anybody to see a white-tailed deer. Black bear were basically gone. Wild turkeys were gone. Elk were at, a tenth of the population as they are today. So we had a real crisis, and, a lot of these groups can really pat themselves on the back for the work they did in bringing those species back from the brink. Now, there was a downside of that, too, in that today every species out there has a group fighting for it. be it, sheep or mule deer or elk or trout or bass or snook or tarpon. It doesn't matter what it is. There's a group out there protecting it. But during that proliferation of those species groups, it sort of took the collective eye off the ball in terms of federal policy. And we started to see, that nobody was paying attention to the really big issues that affected everybody. Public lands policy, agriculture policy, funding of the agencies. And so in 2002, a guy named Jim Range, who had been, Howard Baker's chief of staff, and Baker was the majority leader of the U.S. Senate under Reagan, lifelong Republican from Tennessee, and Jim was his chief of staff. And Jim had written a bunch of the sort of seminal environmental laws during the 1970s that, Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, things like that. But it drove him crazy how ineffective he thought the hunting and fishing community was. He'd get lobbied by a half dozen different groups and their little niche issues. They'd never talk to each other. They'd never work together. And he really feared that, the community, hunting and fishing, conservation, was winning little battles and losing big wars. At the same time, you had the rise of the environmental community, which, basically turned off a lot of the sportsmen. These guys were sort of perceived as hippies, very litigious, sort of, not the, the typical culture of, the, hunter and angler. And so, I think that we as a community, the sporting community, really lost our voice in Washington. And the TRCP was created to try to bring that voice back. And I think we've done a pretty good job with that. Pheasants Forever doesn't really care about what happens to marine fisheries policy, but Bonefish and Tarpon Trust and American Sport Fishing Association and Coastal Conservation Association, those guys care a lot. And so what we try to do is become that umbrella where we bring folks together to speak in a common voice on those issues that we all care about and, can all put our shoulder to the wheel to move collectively.
Awesome. For us here in Texas, this is a lot of this stuff is new, at least to us. Here's, the two of us on this podcast, and I'm sure to many people. So it's good to hear stuff like this and some of the concerns that personally I have derived in my mind include, well, what is who is there out there for the greater voice of recreationalists on public land? And I think that that's one reason I wanted to do this interview today, because I see that you guys kind of become the voice for everybody, and all of a sudden now we're not just these little fires all over the country trying to fight a big war. Like you said, it's a bigger voice. So it's great.
Yeah, I think public lands is a good example of sort of how we work. Public lands is sort of fundamental. In Texas, you guys don't have much in the way of public lands. Most of the hunting that happens down there is happening on private lands, and that's great if you happen to have that private land or can afford a lease or something like that. But around the nation, we have about 640 million acres of public lands, and it is sort of what makes us different than, say, a lot of the European countries. Here, we have something called North American Model of Wildlife Conservation, and one of those tenets is sort of the democracy of hunting and fishing. Everybody can do it, regardless of your socioeconomic status, regardless of whether you're a landowner. And the place that a lot of folks do that is on the public lands. In the western United States, about 72% of all hunting happens on public lands. Nationally, about half the hunters hunt some or all of the time on public lands. So if those public lands were to go away, it would essentially end hunting as we know it today in America. You still have it in Texas if you can afford to do it, and you'd have it in other places, but for the average Joe out there who doesn't have a lease, who doesn't have his own, ranch, it takes away a real opportunity.
So, since we're kind of on the subject, can you explain to those who may not know what's in Bill 621 and what stands to be lost?
Well, the 621 is just one example of what we've been seeing really over the last 3 years or so, which is this sort of concerted effort that really has been around since Theodore Roosevelt's time of these private interests that want to get their hands on the public lands. And we've had everything from proposals to sell off all the public lands to basically balance the budget. And then we've had more subtle things like just transfer them to the states and let the states manage them. Or in the case of H.R. 621, that one would solve about 3 million acres, to, quote, help balance the budget. Now, listen, there's some federal lands out there that are excess, and I think we all agree with that. And there's a process in place in federal government where you can get rid of those little acre here or there that don't really make any sense for the federal government to hold and would honestly be better in hands someplace else. But the act under which most of that happens, the revenues for those little sales would go back into a fund to pay for other conservation. And what HR 621 would do is just sell straight out 3 million acres and not have anything come back to the sportsmen or the recreationalists who use as public lands. And what we see is that is the beginning of a slope of you start nickel and diming the system and selling off a little bit. Sorry, it's some excess lands right now to balance the budget. Tomorrow it may be an entire national forest or an entire national wildlife refuge. When the Congress was debating the Puerto Rican debt bill, they tried to slip in a provision to sell off the Vieques National Wildlife Refuge in Puerto Rico to, quote, help, to get rid of that to help, Puerto Rico's debt. Well, listen, that refuge doesn't just belong to Puerto Rico, it belongs to all of us. And it's just one more attempt that we're seeing of, folks who fundamentally don't believe in the public land system to try to, chink it away. Now, during the election, actually Donald Trump, to his credit, ran on a platform of keeping the public lands in public hands. And, we've talked a lot with, that time candidate Trump, now President Trump, about the importance of this, and he was great on this issue during the campaign. His son, Don Jr., is an avid hunter, sportsman. Both he and then, his brother Eric actually go down to Texas a good bit and hunt and get it. And so, they've been very strong on, sort of pushing back on this. But, that has not stopped, these forces that don't like public lands to keep, trying these different things. There was another bill in Congress that got introduced last year that actually passed out of the House Resources Committee that would essentially allow every state in the nation to buy 2 million acres of national forest and take it out of multiple use, which is what it is today, and put it into basically you have to manage it for timber production, period. And then there was nothing in the provision that after a state were to do that and go in and clear cut it, they couldn't just sell it off to developers that have it developed. It would exit the public estate altogether. So these are the kind of things we're dealing with, and we need sportsmen to stand up and push back because fundamentally it's an attack on hunting and fishing in America.
Okay. KC, you want to weigh in on, you got any questions or anything for Whit?
Yeah. Hey, Whit, KC here. It's good talking to you, and it's good to hear your insight. You touched on something earlier, and I wanted to talk about. This year was probably the hardest ballot I've ever casted as an adult. I'm not very old, but voted in a few cycles here. And for me, I grew up mostly leaning towards the right side of the political scale. It was really tough, but when, now President Trump came out to stand on the public lands platform, kind of in the face of most of the Republican Party, it kind of gave me some insurance to think that, my vote will be safe. However, it's not all about the president, as we all know, so it's kind of tough to place your votes and be a constituent of, different senators and stuff who have separate allegiances than myself on certain topics, while some other topics of, morality or Second Amendment rights and things like that, I do agree with. So where do we fall in that place? Is it a thing where we're just going to have to accept that we're going to vote for a senator who's good on guns but bad on public lands, or vote the other direction?
Yeah, listen, I think, so Casey, I think that's a great question. I think a lot of sportsmen have grappled with it. For too long, we've sort of allowed politicians to get away with, if I'm good on Second Amendment, I can call myself the friend of the sportsman, and I can be really crappy on everything involving public lands, clean water, you name it. And listen, that's not fair. Listen, I own a lot of guns. I support the Second Amendment strongly, but that's not enough. I mean, if you care about the sportsman, you also have to care about, public lands, access, clean water, things like that. I mean, you've seen them off in Texas, but look at what we had to deal with in Florida this past year, where you had algal blooms off of both coasts that shut down fishing all over Florida. And, that is because you got, really lousy water coming out of, Lake Okeechobee and some of the rivers in Central Florida. Now that is, a lot of politicians don't think of that as a sportsman's issue, but that is as much of a sportsman's issue as Second Amendment in my mind, and I hope that in other people's minds too. So, if you want to call yourself a friend of the sportsman, you got to do more than just be good on Second Amendment. That's my opinion.
How are hunters and anglers and then other recreationalists reacting to the push, to dispose of public lands, and are there any of these groups reacting differently than kind of the majority of these outdoor recreationalists, or are they kind of being pretty cohesive with the way they're pursuing things here?
Well, I think you see a mix. I think that people are starting to wake up and realize that this isn't just some lunatic fringe that sort of bubbles up every now and then, like the Sagebrush Rebellion or the Shovel Brigade back in Nevada in the 1990s. This is a well-funded, well-organized campaign to get rid of public lands. And it's very sophisticated, and it's happening at the local level, it's happening at the state level, and it's happening at the national level. And it's going to continue happening if we don't rise up and push back on it. Now, I think you've seen, we have something called www.sportsmansaccess.org, which is a website we helped create with some of our partners to allow sportsmen to go in and sign a petition and say, basically, Congress, keep your hands off my public lands. And we have about 40,000 signatures on that so far. You have some of the other conservation groups. Listen, a lot of the hunting and fishing community doesn't want to get involved with advocacy. They don't want to get political. They want to talk about, what scents to use and how high to put up their deer stand and, things like that, which are things I love talking about too. But, at some point, if you call yourself a conservation group and you're trying to protect the legacy that we've had for 100 plus years, you're going to have to get engaged in this. And I think you've seen groups like, National Wildlife Federation, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Trout Unlimited, and some others, be pretty aggressive on this and really start to rise to the challenge. Other groups are still, hoping it just goes away and they don't have to say anything about it. Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation has been great on this issue. They've really been pushing hard. We're starting to see a change now also with sort of the hunting celebrities coming out and really getting into this issue. Steve Rinella, Meat Eater, he has been relentless on this issue, really pushing. If you've ever watched his show, it's not, about, 18-point, whitetail. It's about, sort of the experience of going into the backcountry, killing an animal, maybe sometimes not, and then, eating that animal and really respecting the traditions of hunting and that animal. And he has been great on this issue. Randy Newberg, who does, Fresh Tracks or On Your Own Adventures, he has been great on this issue. But too often, and I think all the hunting and fishing celebrities that use public lands have a responsibility to stand up and be heard on this issue. But you turn on most of those weekend hunting shows, and folks are just high-fiving it, sitting in their deer stand and shooting a buck over a feeder, and that's not good enough. So I get frustrated with the community. I get frustrated with our brethren out there, and I'd rather be talking about fun stuff than this stuff. But listen, we have a responsibility to our kids to make sure that what we have today is there for them.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir. Yeah, very much agree with that. I've been pretty proud of how so-called some of the celebrities, quote in quotes, have reacted to this. It's really cool to see Rinella and Randy and Joe Rogan, guys like that, really be good voices and using their platform to really reach a lot of people, and it's been pretty encouraging. I want to ask you a question about the Pittman-Robertson Act, which you touched on earlier. Formulated in 1937, I believe, and then amended a few times along the way, and then they added another one that's similar for fisheries. Is it time to revisit the Pittman-Robertson Act and revise or amend to maybe encompass more of our general recreators, or sportsmen? I'm more than happy to foot more of the bill, but at sometimes, if it's okay for you to go out and take a picture of a marmot and not really add anything monetarily to conservation, are you really helping much?
Yeah, it's an issue that's been debated around here for, literally the last 50 years. And I think it's being debated a lot more today because what you're really seeing is, especially the state fish and game agencies, but also our federal agencies, are, having a real hard time making ends meet. Everything is more expensive. They have more issues to deal with, from endangered species to invasive species to you name it. They've in the note, pretty much revenues are flat, and in Congress, conservation funding used to be about 2.5% of the federal budget back in the 1970s. Today it's about 1%. So you've seen this gradual starving of Fish and Wildlife Service, Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, Park Service. And that has been in part because, we've had explosions of costs in other areas, but it's also in part because it's a deliberate effort to, and what they used to say during the Reagan years is to starve the beast. If you cut off the funds for government, you shrink government. Now, it hasn't worked very well for things like Medicare or Social Security or defense, but it's worked pretty darn well for the federal land managing agencies. So we've had this, sort of slow deterioration of their ability to address these challenges, and that's largely money-based. So here's where the sportsmen come in. We're still buying our licenses, we're buying our tags, we're buying our equipment and paying that excise tax. So we are holding up a greater and greater share every year of conservation funding. And at some point, some other interest group has got to get in and make a contribution too. Listen, if you're a bird watcher, shouldn't we be, let's say your bird seed, let's put a small excise tax on bird seed to pay for neotropical migratory bird conservation. Should we be doing something with binoculars? Should mountain bikes be, or bicycles be, have an excise tax that pays for maintenance of bike trails or creation of new bike trails? I mean, we got to start thinking in those terms, because, I'm not necessarily keen on opening up, Dingell Johnson or Pittman Robertson and, bringing other things in, because I like the fact that we pay for, fish and wildlife conservation. But at the same time, I feel strongly that we need to create other programs like those from other interest groups to help carry the load and the things they care about. Now, you talked specifically about Pittman Robertson. There's one thing we are trying to change right now with that. The Dingell Johnston program, which is the fishing side, they can use a small portion of those revenues, but basically for what we call R3, which is recruitment, retention, reactivation. And so if you see the Take Me Fishing campaign, which is a big national campaign, has a Hispanic equivalent in trying to reach out to Hispanic folks. But the whole effort there is to engage folks, to get them interested in fishing, to make it easier to go out and buy a license, to do boating and all that. And it's been really successful in turning around the trend of declining license sales. We can't do that on the hunting side. There's the authorization, the Pittman-Robertson Act, doesn't allow us to use any of those dollars, us being the states, to basically pay for those R3 activities. So I think that is a change that needs to be made. We're pushing that with a bunch of our partner groups so that we can get out there and really try to engage and reactivate, the hunters, who are out there, because that really is the future of the sport.
Mm-hmm. So we've already kind of visited this area a couple times, but we're interested in Texas being it's kind of an anomaly of sorts, considering that we don't have a whole lot of public land percentage wise, but there are several state-owned lands that have been around some time now and are available for public use. How does Texas actually compare with some of these western states on the public land issues and the public land transfer issues, and why should we care as Texans?
Well, I mean, I think there's, it's hard to say what's right or wrong. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, you guys don't have a ton of public lands. I'm sure you appreciate what you've got a lot. But at the same time, I know a ton of people in Texas go to Colorado, to Wyoming, to Idaho, to Montana, and hunt and fish. Mm-hmm. And they're doing that primarily on the public lands. So even if it isn't necessarily a Texas issue, Texans enjoy the benefits of public lands. I mean, I think about some of the debates we have about Alaska and like the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge or the Pebble Mine area in Bristol Bay. Those areas I might never ever get to, but I like knowing they're out there. I like knowing they're producing a gazillion salmon, and really sort of keeping the Alaska that I have in my mind there for my kids to enjoy someday. Mm. And I think that even if you don't you don't live in a public land state, you can appreciate the public lands. You can appreciate what they mean to being American and what they mean to being a sportsman in America.
Right. Yeah, I agree. We have put the public lands to use in several of the states surrounding Texas. Casey and I have. He he actually shot a nice 6x6 in Colorado last year on public land. So we get it for sure. We just want the listeners to understand that just because they may not use them, like you said, doesn't mean that their son or grandson or granddaughter may not go out there one day.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And it's also just it's something that makes America unique. I mean, the system we have, and to a lesser degree Canada and Mexico have, are unique in really all the world, and really it's the envy of the world. And you look at America and any of the game species that we have out there, every single game species we have is in good shape because hunters pay for conservation, we pay for well-managed habitat, we pay for enforcement of the laws, we pay for the science to regulate that. And the public lands are kind of the foundation of a lot of that, because that's the opportunity folks have to get outside if you don't have the money to have a lease or private property yourself. So it's I just see it as American as anything else we have.
Yeah, for sure, Whit. This case here again, I kind of feel like the future of hunting is in danger, especially in my own state, because of the lack of access. And it's essentially become, a nobility sport if you want to hunt private or have decent access to lands. My sole ability to hunt multiple game species in Texas, white-tailed deer, turkeys, mule deer out west, will be on public at all this next season. And it's such a catch-22 because I want other Texans to feel passionately about this and have a voice, but at the same time, we are so limited in the amount of public lands we have that if we have a substantial increase of public land hunters, we will not have the acreage necessary to do so, And so it's a tough situation to be in. Do we lobby for more public lands? Do we just, I would never say keep it quiet, but what do we do for our future kids? Like I want my kids to be able to grow up, hunt and fish and gather and be able to canoe down wild rivers and things like that in Texas. And it's so hard to get to. So where do we go from here?
Yeah, listen, I hear you, Casey, and I think that, I don't know what the future is in Texas, what you guys can do about it. I'm sure that, listen, there are a bunch of programs out there to, buy land and to, convert them into, public spaces. Land and Water Conservation Fund, which is actually funded by oil and gas revenues. That's, in theory, there's $900 million a year that could be used to purchase, lands for the public. And a lot of our great hunting lands and sort of access opportunities have come through, Land and Water Conservation Fund. So even if there were opportunities in Texas, some big ranches coming up for sale, and the state really wanted to, get it to provide public hunting and fishing, it certainly could. Granted, it's a little bit expensive in Texas nowadays. But I think the key thing is, listen, you can always, jump into your car, you can drive for a day, and you can be in some amazing, public lands. And, even if you don't have it in Texas, that's, it makes you going to appreciate what you have in Colorado even more, or New Mexico, or, places like that, where you can get to without that much difficulty. And, it's a bit of a road trip. You can't do it after work each day, but it's better than nothing.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir, for sure. And that's something that me and my family have taken advantage of many times in the past. Like Tyler alluded to earlier, I was able to go and harvest a bull elk on public land, OTC, in Colorado this year. And, it may or may not work out this year where I can financially do that. And I like to parallel this some to like the, you'll know the name of the conservation org, but the Taiman conservation organization. I'll never fish for taiman in Mongolia or China, yep. But I love to know that they're still there. And I feel like without public lands in North America, you won't have the guys who sit in Texas and dream of listening to bugling bull elk in September. And that's just a sad thought and not a world I want to live in.
Yeah, no, I hear you there. And, listen, and public access is, we have the big mountains in the Western hunting, but, public access is also a boat ramp that just allows you to get out onto the Gulf of Mexico and go chase redfish. Mm-hmm. It's a boat ramp on a river that you can go and do a float, or just a Corps of Engineers facility where you can put your boat on and go catch bass. So I think that, public access is not just about, sort of getting into the deep national forests in the back country where you can get that 6x6 bull. It can be a lot more local and, not maybe as grandiose, but really special, especially getting your family outside.
Yeah. With that said, how big is the concerned base of conservationists right now that are worried about public land transfer, and how big does it need to be? What should it be to give us numbers that we can fight the war with, and where do we need to be as far as numbers go, and where are we, and how many individuals are using these federal public lands a year?
Well, the various statistics are, I forget the exact number, about 13.5 million people hunt in this country. And of that, probably about half of those folks use public land some or all of the time. So we're talking, somewhere in that 7 million, people, range. And, that is, we have got, on our sportsaccess.org, petition, we've got about 40,000 folks signed up for that. So we can be doing a whole lot better than we are right now. I mean, I'm happy we have that many, but I'd love to see that, sort of, double this year and then double again next year as more people realize the threat that's involved with this. I was out at the SHOT Show in Las Vegas, and I go out there every year and work with some of our sponsor friends. But we also host a conservation roundtable with the outdoor editors from Field and Stream, Sports to Field, Outdoor Life, Peterson's, things like that, and our partner organizations, just to talk about conservation, what we can expect. And listen, the public lands, sell-off, transfer, that was the hot topic this year. And my point to a lot of those folks in the room is that, I don't think there are going to be many major attacks on the Second Amendment over the next few years, with Trump in there. Let's focus some of that attention that we've been focusing on Second Amendment to these public land issues, and let's, put a nail in the coffin of this really bad idea now. But that's not going to happen unless we get, sheer numbers. And what those numbers are, just all I know is more is better. And, I really take my hat off to guys like Rinella and Newberg who push this on their vehicles. But in Field and Stream and Outdoor Life do a great job in those publications talking about public lands. But listen, I'd love to see, all the publications really embrace this and push it and make it a litmus test issue.
So as far as TRCP is concerned, or any conservation organization for that matter, what can the simple individual do to kind of vet an organization and know that their funds that they are donating are being put to use effectively?
Great question. A couple things. One, everybody's got a website these days. Go on there. If you don't see the public land issue fairly prominently on there, ask a question as to, gee, how come you guys aren't engaged in this issue, or what are you doing? If you don't like the response, go someplace else. Mm-hmm. Also, I would look at things like, all the groups are a little bit different. There are some independent watchdog groups that rate charities in terms of like where your, dollars, bang for the buck. There's an organization called Charity Navigator that gives you anywhere from 0 to 4 stars, depending on how efficient you are. We're a 4-star organization, which means that we have very low overhead. Most of the money we raise goes directly to conservation. But, that's another thing that, they can check on. But, and listen, if you're a mule deer hunter, there are organizations you're going to tend to favor. Go to those organizations and, check them out. And listen, if you don't see anything on their website about the public land issue, ask them. Say it's important to you and how come they're not engaged, and challenge them to get engaged.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, I guess kind of wrapping this thing up, how can guys like us from Texas, where we're not necessarily close to the subject at hand, how can we help? What can we do to help the issue?
Well, one thing you can do is your senators and representatives' votes in Congress count just as much as somebody from Wyoming or Utah or one of the public land states. So let's make sure that your folks down there in Texas and you guys are letting your elected representatives know that the public lands are important to you, even if you don't have a ton of them in Texas. And, so that's one thing you can do. 2, keep getting the word out and, keep, pushing this. It's like, everybody wants to have dessert, but you got to have a few vegetables with it, and this is the vegetables. So we got to talk about this stuff, and we've got to push it, or else we can't really enjoy the dessert down the road. I think that I think those are the really key things. I mean, you'd be really hard. I mean, having been here in Washington for a long time, it's hard for me to overstress the importance of direct contact with your members of Congress. I mean, it's one thing to sign a petition on our website, and I want everyone to do that. But it's even more important to write an individual letter, to place a phone call, to go to a town hall meeting where your senator or member of Congress is going to be showing up, and speak to them about this. Speak to their staff about it, because that is worth 1,000 email signatures.
Mm-hmm. Well, awesome. We know you're a busy man and have a lot on your plate right now, so we really do appreciate the time. Where can someone go to donate to TRCP if they're interested in doing such?
TRCP.org is our website, and you'll see a whole bunch of stuff about our issues, including the public lands issues. And if you want to become a member, make a donation, get a nice little gift in return for a donation, it should be pretty easy for you to follow it and do it there. I also, go to that sportsmansaccess.org site, sign the petition. That's not a money-raising site, but at the same time, it's important for political advocacy.
Mm-hmm. We'll make sure to link to all that in the show notes. And once again, we appreciate it, Whit. Thank you for your vast amount of knowledge on this short episode, man.
All right, Tyler, Casey, anytime you want me back, let me know.
Yes, sir. We will do it. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Whit.
All right, thanks, guys.
All right, bye.
Bye-bye.
Man, what a load of information.
My goodness, dude. That is a smart guy. I'm so glad we got to talk to Whit.
I was kind of flustered. Like, I couldn't really talk because he was just like, he would answer half my questions that I had next, and then I would be sitting there like flat-footed thinking about something, like really deeply about something he was
exactly saying. Yeah, Whit is expanding our minds here, and we're supposed to actually ask this guy questions like, are we worthy? Yeah. Like, no, but man, so much thanks to him coming and talking to us. He's a busy guy, and this is a busy and trying time for all sportsmen everywhere, especially those ones in such high places as him.
Yep. On another note here, we have released a couple of videos recently through our media channels, which include YouTube and Facebook. So KC did an elk fajitas video, and we might have talked about that in the last podcast, but we finished that up. It's a really super cool video. It's short. It's under 4 minutes, and it shows you step by step what his thought process is when preparing and cooking these fajitas. And so he gets to showcase a little bit of his Tex-Mex side. And then we released also another video it's a fishing video called Valley of Life, and it's basically a trip I went on with a good buddy of mine who helped me to video the whole thing, and we went to the Valley Vidal, or Valle Vidal, however you want to say it, in New Mexico, which is an incredible area where I guess it rains like every afternoon there in the summer because it's just lush green and tons of meadow section with Rio Grande cutthroats, wild and native, in their 8% or whatever of the range that they originally inhabited, doing what they do, feeding on dry flies, hoppers, and caddis flies and
woolly boogers.
Woolly boogers,
yeah.
And you'll see that if you watch it. But we had an original version of that I did that was like probably close to 16 minutes, and I have kind of taken it and shortened it down to make the best of the best, and I think it's under 8 minutes now. So it's a quick little watch, and it gives you a little bit of the story of and the beauty of that area. So definitely go check that out on our Facebook channel or our Facebook page, and make sure you keep up with our Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel as well to make sure that you're seeing these videos as they come out.
Yeah. Another thing too, guys, and something near and dear to my heart and Tyler's too, like we all utilize public lands and dream to use and aspire to be a part of wild places where wild creatures live. And there's no way for those things to continue to exist without our support. Call your state representatives. Just call up and say no to House Bill or HR 621, and to keep public lands in public hands, to just ensure the fact that we have a future in what we love to do, and that the animals that we love have a future as well.
Absolutely, man. definitely do that, and we will make sure to link to in the show notes to we can put the phone number in there.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. I bet we can find all the representatives of Texas and the two senators.
I'll link to anything that we can use to get in touch with these representatives, and then we're going to link to the sportsmansaccess.org that Whit talked about earlier, as well as the TRCP. Make sure that you guys have the opportunity to donate to those causes if you want to, and to be involved. And then also, I may throw out just a little plug here for BHA, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, which we are a part of, and they are doing great things within the political spectrum as well, doing lots of legislative work, and trying to make sure and let sportsmen know who is on their side within our representatives and who is not. So anyway, a couple of great organizations there. Make sure you go check them out. Have all that linked in the show notes, as well as we'll do a couple links to the new videos that we put out. And I think that's going to be about it for us, man. Make sure that if you enjoyed this episode, that you go to iTunes and give us a 5-star review, and make sure that you have subscribed to the podcast so that you can be updated every time that we update the feed here, and you can get the newest podcast before anybody else does. So anyway, appreciate you guys listening. I hope that you found it interesting and that you learned something today. As always, God bless, and we'll see you soon. Make sure to get out and live in your element.